Thank you, gentlemen and lady, for joining us on the show this morning. I'm Temple Ashaji. With us on the program to dissect the headlines from Pan-African, the continent generally, we've got Chima Okadike, who is a consumer goods analyst with Vetiva Capital Management. We also have with us on the show this morning Ali Kansachu, CEO and founder of Rich Frontiers Management, and of course, Bosun Mofaye from Frontier Africa Reports. Quickly, we look at the indexes we track daily. The Nigerian Stock Exchange was down yesterday 0.74% yesterday Tuesday. Ivory Coast, where the BRVM Stock Exchange representing the Francophone markets was positive by some 0.16%. The Egyptian Stock Exchange was positive by 0.42%, and we saw a recovery on the Nairobi Stock Exchange by 0.69% yesterday Tuesday. South Africa went down yesterday by 0.10%. Looking at the Eastern African headlines before us this morning, we'll start with the first one from Moody's, which came in yesterday by way of a press statement that the higher U.S. Treasury yields won't stop emerging markets and Africa capital inflows. Kenya Air repurposes aircraft for cargo operations. And of course, Jumbo Pay gets license for virtual mobile services in Kenya. Ethiopia is setting up an asset management corporation to absorb residual debts. And Maj Stock Exchange reports yesterday that Obvest Investments is to pay dividends of some 0.0135 cents per share for the fourth quarter of 2020, which is a year that just ended. I'd like to bring you in, Ali Kansachi, to help us make sense of all of these headlines from the eastern part of Africa.
So, we've had this tremendous emerging markets rally that kicked off last year and rolled into this year. And I think Moody's were noting in the last few weeks, we saw a backup in US Treasury yields. That move is now kind of run out of steam, but basically they were talking about the risk of a sell-off in emerging markets because of that sell-off in US Treasury yields translating into higher interest rates in EM assets. I think what I've noticed more really is credit-driven events. Ethiopia, the latest example, 250 or 200 basis point move in the bond around what we've been seeing, heightened political risk and a seemingly intractable situation in Tigray province. Then we've got things like Zambia and others, where really the issue has not been the spread between the credit spread between these countries and the US. It's not about the absolute level of US Treasury yields, it's country specific. So I think that's the point I would make. I think that's much more important right now. And therefore Moody's, they're correct in some aspects, but I think really the situation is being driven by very specific scenarios. With respect to Ethiopia's asset management, as we mentioned before, they put out this letter saying that they want to look at reprofiling, restructuring their debt. That came out, I think, on Friday. Or Thursday, we've had a sell-off since then. And as we previously said, they're not that great at messaging the markets. They seem to operate in a little bit of their own bunker. And I think they would be well advised to look at their communication strategy, particularly if they're going for this nuclear option. The situation in Ethiopia, I think, is a signal for the situation in many other countries across the continent, and it's not difficult to make that list out. Kenya Airways, the good news is we've got Valentine's Day on the 14th of February, and we're going to be supplying a lot of the roses to the global market that normally firms up the shilling. The shilling, I think, is 30 cents firmer, anticipating Valentine's Day. And Kenya Airways is talking about, turning more of their airplanes into cargo, something that Ethiopian Airlines have already been doing Kenya Airways is short of planes, cargo planes, for the 14th of February, and have permitted Ethiopia to take up some of the slack. So that's an interesting development. Jambo Pay getting the mobile license. Look, you know, here in Kenya, Safaricom is a very dominant player, and you've got to work out what your real niche and your USP is if you're seeking to take them on. Now, many people would think that's a sort of very brave commercial decision to take up.
Thank you very much, Ali. Chima, before we bring you into the Western African space, is there any perspective you're trying to share with us, or you have to share with us from Verteva Capital Management regarding the Moody's Investors forecast on the U.S. Treasury?
Thank you, Temple. Just like Ali said, I think that the rating or the report should be country specific, because as the yields are being lifted or rising in the US, it doesn't mean that we'll start to see a lot of flight from all African markets. Some of these countries have responded differently to the pandemic, and they have been able to still maintain some right fundamentals. So for some of them that have been able to give nice returns and still are still looking stable, we should not see that, as there are some countries with shaky fundamentals, and we should not expect to see that. We'll see stable capital inflows for some of those countries. And I think that my key takeaway from Ali is that they'll be country specific.
All right, and thank you so much for that contribution. Let's now move on to the Western African trade, where OPEC is saying 2021 oil demand growth quotes to some 5.6 million barrels per day, as opposed to 59 a million barrels per day. Airtel Africa is now to sell minor stake in mobile money units. African banks manage current crisis better than previous crisis that we've seen. So said the vice president for the for IFC, representing the Middle East and African markets. The Iraq Unity, which is a listed company on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, says revenues are dipping some 68.14%. Union Diagnostics transfers some 1.4 billion ordinary shares to Cedar Advisory for 492.75 million naira. And in Ghana, oil revenue there dips to some by 30% to $666.38 billion. Bosin, I'd like you to speak to the OPEC, the development that we're seeing around OPEC. I think this morning, crude oil price has now risen to around $58 per barrel, and some other headlines that you may want to make your pick from.
I think, thank you, Tempo. I think a very quick correction there. That figure was to be 5.9 million barrels per day and not 59. I guess that comes from the editorial team, and I take responsibility for that. That 5.9 million barrels per day was what OPEC initially thought the oil growth demand for the year would be, but now being revised down by, I think that's roughly 300 million barrels per day. That's not, well, that's still within range, as it were. But if you look at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, separately forecasting $65 per barrel for this year, where now London Brent is around 58 as we speak. US oil this morning about away from 55 to, but from 53 to 54, 55. So it looks like looking about neck to neck with the Brent in a manner of speaking right now, with very slight few dollars difference. And that speaks to a whole lot of the market sentiment. But let's see what happens at the OPEC committee meeting in the next couple of days, by the way, to see where things go from here, and see how the vaccinations for the virus. I think there are about 14 million, about 140 million doses so far distributed worldwide, according to Bloomberg this morning. So it looks like a whole lot more of these vaccines are going on. China says it's going to give, Zimbabwe will be among the first countries in Africa to get their own version of the vaccine. The Zimbabwean says they're putting $100 million aside for the vaccine to come into the country as well. We'll see the impact. The second wave had hit in Zimbabwe even far more than the first wave. We're happy with what is going on in South Africa. At least there's a little bit of a slowdown. So all that is giving some measure of optimism that perhaps we could see more folks traveling, tourism in Kenya, elsewhere, perhaps in Egypt and what have you, North African corridor, and that perhaps we'll be able to get back to work. Some machines will roll, some buses will start running, automotive, whatever. So a bit of optimism of that is flowing into the oil market right now. Thank you.
Thank you, boss. And Chima, let me bring you in to help us to unpack all of these corporate stories that we have around the Nigerian markets at this point. The Union Diagnostics and RAC Unity, as well as Airtel.
Well, before I get to Airtel, I would like to I'd like to just say something about what Watson said. And while I agree with him, I think that we may continue to see some changes to the OPEX demand forecast. Earlier it was 5.9 million barrels per day, now it's 5.6. And depending on how vaccinations go and how lockdowns improve, remember that we're seeing some new strains of the coronavirus entering into some countries. And so depending on how that continues to unfold and play out, we should still expect some changes or variations to forecast for demand. However, I'd like to state that with the current oil pricing, it looks very good for a lot of countries. One of the headlines you have here is that Ghana's oil revenue has dipped last year. Although they have some technical challenges as well, I'm sure it had a lot to do with the low output they had to bring on, as well as the lower prices they had to deal with. So, as well as for Nigeria as well. So, I think going forward, we should all be very optimistic. However, and the rising prices gives us a lot of hope to look out for. Yeah. Then for the Airtel story that they're about to sell, or they're planning to sell some minority stake, it would look quite confusing because according to their latest results, we saw that revenue increased. The revenue increased for the company, and their customer base also increased in that period. So I think that it's something that when we're now trying to reconcile it with the news that they're trying to sell some minority stake, it seems confusing. However, I think an article I read is just showing, it stated that the company is just trying to get some cash infusion into the mobile money market or mobile money business. And I think it also is good for indigenous corporation. When you're selling to, you'll probably be looking to sell to indigenous companies in those specific countries. And I think it would help to maybe widen their reach in terms of the mobile money reach.
Key for every investor at this point will be how the whole development, the sale of this subsidiary will, at the end of the day, impact the share price of the company on the stock exchange. Because in recent time, it's been surging close to 1,000 naira. I'm actually looking forward to when it will hit that particular figure. Let's move on to the Southern African market, where Vodacom's third quarter revenue came in 4% higher. That's 19 billion rands. Group revenue also surged by some 6.4%. Orion Minerals Limited is to buy Cape Copper Complex for 86 million rand. Ford also declared some 16 billion rand in terms of 16 billion rand, that's by way of investment in the SA plans. Zimbabwe reallocate some $100 million for anti-COVID-19. And of course, the Angola story there says that Lulu Diamonds rakes in some $5.9 million in the first sale that it is recording for the year 2021. That must be a figure for January. Ali, I'll need you to look at the Vodacom story and perhaps any other picks that you may have there.
So let me start actually with the Ford story, because that would represent the single biggest FDI investment in South Africa Inc. So it's a pretty big deal. And I think it firmed up the Rand. The Rand went below 15 to about 14.95. And this will allow South Africa to make cars, I think, for the Southern African market as well. So, you know, at a time when they've had lots of negative news, I think this is seriously positive for South Africa. It speaks to a market opportunity in country and in the region. And I think President Ramaphosa will be reasonably pleased with that decision by Ford. So quite a big deal in my view. Vodacom 4% and 6.4%. You know, the telecom companies, we have really seen a surge in data and in mobile money. Vodacom, of course, holds the Safaricom shareholding of 35%, and therefore there's also a translation issue from its regional stakes. But I think, they will, because it's such a big franchise, some would have hoped for close to double-digit increase, but I think that's pretty impressive in the circumstances. But I'm sure the big growth engines have really been around data. And so overall, I think, South Africa, as Barson said, we've fallen dramatically in terms of infections. We're below 10% test positivity rate for the first time in 71 days. We've had a relaxation of some of the curfew rules. We've got this Ford announcement. So I think, there's some green shoots of recovery that we can see, in the background there.
Thanks a great deal, Ali. Bosun, have you got some contributions on this?
Yes, I think the issue around the Ford investment is quite opposite. I think everyone needs to understand that, look, this is big for South Africa. South Africa is I think it's the #1 automobile manufacturing hub in Africa. When you get out of South Africa, you go straight to Egypt, Morocco, and you keep it within that region. South Africa, not so much between Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Ghana, and the rest of the West Coast. Central Africa, likely nearly zero. So this is big money, as you can talk about it, $1 billion, 16 billion rand. That's good money, and that's good. That will create some more jobs in South Africa. We hope this will help. But I think the Lulu Diamond story from Angola is also coming very well, because it looks like diamond sales is now increasing because of the vaccine that is going around the world. According to reports 2 weeks ago, online sales or online sales for diamond is now getting more off the ground, so compensating for that very sharp decline that we saw early last year when the virus vaccine kept the wealthy and the ultra wealthy out of the diamonds, and everybody were piling into gold as a safe haven, and a bit of that also into silver. So that's also pretty good news for the diamond market as well. Angola, we're having some news. We had some news yesterday evening that Chad and Ethiopia are now asking to be part of the DSSI G20 debt restructuring program. Ethiopia is looking for some debt restructuring, some debt relief in the manner of speaking. There's no conclusion on that yet. But Angola is also not out of the woods yet, despite the fact that they've had some conversations and deals with the Chinese. Some of the protests are still going on. A report came in last night about 9 or 10 people were dead in part of the country because of the protests against the government. All of this put together that, yes, things are moving on, but again, there's still a whole lot of fault lines, if you put it that way.
Thank you very much, Boss. And finally, is the Northern African markets, where today we expect, today to struck tomorrow, we're expecting the Egyptian Central Bank to give us the decision of its MPC meeting, or the outcome of its MPC meeting. Now, we know that HC Securities, an asset management company there, has now forecasted that the MPC could hold rates, and they're not likely to change, given the fact that inflation is now tapering close to the targets that the bank is seeing for 2022. Tunisia is to issue its first Sukuk bond. The $111 million is expected to be raised any moment from now. National Bank of Egypt also is mulling some £2 billion loan for the rail sector. And we know that in Algeria, banks' capital raising deadline has now been extended to June the 30th of 2021. Ali, let me get your thoughts on the Algerian bank's recapitalization exercise. I mean, what does this extension mean for those financial institutions there?
Well, I was pretty taken aback at that call of $150 million. I mean, that's a chunky piece of change. And it informs me that, Algerian banks on balance are going to be the best capitalized banks in Africa. Of course, there are some serious challenges at the moment with the Algerian economy. The currency's been under pressure, revenues have been on the low side. And of course, last year we had all that political hullabaloo and everyone was in the streets. But my main takeaway is that these banks are going to be very well capitalized. The question will be, are they also going to be competitive outside Algeria? Because to date, I've not seen a big impact of Algeria. We've seen Moroccan banks, we've seen Egyptian banks, we've seen Nigerian banks, Kenyan banks, all moving outside their borders, but I haven't seen the same from the Algerians. So it's something to keep an eye on. And with that kind of capital base, you would be a big beast in on the continent. Just quickly touch on two stories. Egypt tends to be cautious with interest rates, and also food prices have been on the rise. I would agree with that prediction that we see no change. And then the rail sector, the attractive thing about investing in the rail sector in Egypt is you're running in a straight line practically along the Nile without very much else. 97% of the population of Egypt is on that one channel. So it'll be, relatively easy, I suspect, to marshal capital to redevelop that railway.
Thank you very much, Ali. Bosin, Ali just raised the point about the Algerian banks regarding their competitiveness outside their region. But one particular point again is the fact that these banks in that region, just like a lot of Nigerian banks, are also critically exposed to the oil and gas sector. And we know how well the oil space has now been challenged enough to now shore up the NPL ratio of the banks across all of these oil producing countries. How significant will this extension and deadline be for this sort of exercise for all of these banks?
Well, the Nigerian insurance sector consolidation was also kind of stopped towards the end of last year, although that was court-induced by the regulator. The second phase of it was to be end of September this year, 2021. If you look at $150 million, so the money is hard everywhere, except in the developed markets where you have so much liquidity sitting down. In Africa, we don't have so much that money. So if you're asking banks to step up with $150 million, I'm sure you're going to ask yourself where the money is coming from. A lot of the Algerian banks are not in the private sector hands. Government has a bit of interest in some of them. So I think it makes sense to extend it for another 6 months to see how they all come up with this money. I'm sure the Bank of Algeria, which is the central bank, has done some stress tests to see why they need to consolidate, and then to begin to look at a new horizon of the post-pandemic world. In the manner of speaking, let's hope that we don't have a third or fourth, fifth wave, whatever it is, or as these waves come, they become less toxic, less deadly, less infectious. And the vaccines news are saying that some of the vaccines already now can deal with the new variant. That is good news this morning on the news box. All of this together, I think, is good news for Algeria. But as Ali said, the Egyptian banks are already looking at how to enter Kenya, by the way. That announcement came last year. So this is Access Bank of Nigeria now looking how to enter Egypt as well. I'm sure Morocco will come next, and after that, maybe Algeria.
Right. Thank you very much, Bosin. Chima, I'll come back to you now with your final thoughts. In terms of the markets today, have you got any outlook to share with us?
Definitely, but before we get to the outlook, we'd just like to do a run-through of the week-to-date performance of the market. So we saw that yesterday the market declined 74 basis points, which is quite significant, bringing the total week-to-date loss to about 84 basis points, and bringing the year-to-date performance about 4.04%, although that is in the positive region. So what we saw was that for the losses, we had Zenith Bank, Nigerian Breweries, and some other large cap stocks. Previously, we had seen losses in consumer goods sector from flour mills and Nestle, two large cap stocks. But going forward, we do not think that this should continue, because if we look at what is driving sentiment in the equity markets, the fixed income markets, low yield fixed income markets have continued to remain low. So we do not see that sentiment reversing anytime soon, except for when the CBN or when the DMO decides to raise interest rates back, which nobody knows when that is likely. At least according to the new calendar that had been released, it doesn't seem like the first quarter will be seeing any raise in yields. So we expect that the sentiments in the equity market should continue to remain positive. So we might see a few profit taking here and there, but the overall sentiment we expect is that we should see continued bargain hunting. We should still see continued inflows into the equity market. So our outlook for the week should remain positive.
Thank you very much, Chima Okadike, consumer goods analyst with Vetiver Capital Management. I appreciate all of your insights on the show this morning. Ali Kansachi, founder of Rich Frontiers Management in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks a great deal for your appearance on the show and, of course, for your analysis. Bosana Mofaye, our executive editor at Frontier Africa Reports. I appreciate all of your analysis as well. This has been Frontier Opening Bell, the third edition for the 3rd of February 2021, and I'm Temple Ashaju. I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you.